Welcome to Secret Story. I was between my junior and senior years in high school and it was a holiday weekend. Unfortunately, I had to work Friday night and by the time I was finished, my friends had all left town for the next 3 days. When I got home my folks told me they were going to spend the weekend in Palm Springs and I was on my own. After thinking about it for a while I called my cousin, who was a few years older than me and lived with my aunt, and asked if they were going to be around that weekend. She told me they were and asked if I wanted to spend the time with them. My aunt was an amazing cook so I knew I wouldn't be existing on fast food for the next 3 days. And the apartment complex they lived in had a nice pool. I packed a bag and headed out to the valley. The next day my aunt told me that they had a planned shopping trip and would be gone most of the day. She left me food for lunch and told me that the pool would probably be pretty empty as many of her neighbors had also gone away for the weekend. All of that worked for me. I changed into swim trunks, grabbed a towel and some tanning lotion and headed to the pool. Unlike most apartment pools, this one wasn't in the center of the complex but was off on the side with a wood fence around it. When I got there a couple of young kids were playing in the pool so I grabbed a lounge chair, put on the lotion and lay back to enjoy the sunshine. Soon the kids disappeared so I jumped in the pool, swam some laps and then went back for more sun. I did that a couple of times when I heard the gate open. I looked over and this short, blonde. She was wearing a short beach robe over a swimsuit of some type. At first, she didn't see me but when she did, she turned around and went back out the gate. I figured she wanted to be alone or didn't want a teenage boy watching her. I decided I'd jump in the pool one more time, dry off with the sun and then go grab some lunch. Just as I was getting out of the pool, the blonde walked back in. She walked over to me and said, "I'm Tanya, the apartment manager." "Who are you?" I told her my name, Jeff, and she asked who I was visiting. I gave her my aunt's name and apartment number. And that satisfied her. Then she asked if I would be willing to help her move some things in her apartment. In the back of my mind, I figured I could make a few bucks helping her out. I told her I needed to dry off, she gave me her apartment number and told me to come by when I was ready to help. I probably napped for a little while because when I became alert, I realized I was dry and I'd promised to help Tanya. I got my stuff together, put my t-shirt on and headed to her apartment. I knocked, she opened the door and invited me in. Tanya was still dressed in the short beach robe and, I assumed, her swimsuit. She asked if I wanted anything cold to drink and I opted for a soda. She told me to sit on the couch and she'd be right back. It took her a little longer than I thought it would but by only a few minutes. She had a soda and a glass of wine and sat down on the couch too. She asked me where I went to school, class year, etc. Just being sociable. I asked her about managing the apartment complex and she said it would be great except for some of the tenants. We chatted some more and finished our drinks. I finally asked her to show me what she needed help with and Tanya stood up. I'm sure my mouth was hanging open as I stared. Tanya said, "Why don't you start by helping me move these?" She sat down next to me. Tanya said, "Let's go find a more comfortable and quieter place." First, she led me to her front door, flipped a sign that said she'd back in a couple of hours and then closed and locked it. Then she led me down a short hallway to her bedroom. Again, I'm sure my mouth was still hanging open. Once we were inside, Tanya closed the bedroom door and locked it too. The next thing I knew, I just lay there in heaven. I have no idea how long that lasted, probably a lot less time than I thought. Like I said, I was in heaven, and figured that was where we would stop. However, Tanya wasn't ready to quit yet. She asked me if I'd ever eaten. I told her no, but I'd read stories about guys doing that. Tanya said, "Well, fair is fair." I wasn't sure exactly how to but Tanya gave me some basic instructions to get me started. I knew I was doing something right. Eventually, she said, "I need a break. Let's go get something cold to drink." I was in a daze. She asked me if I wanted wine, but I thought that would be too much, so she got me a soda and herself a glass of wine. We sat around and talked some more, and then Tanya stood up, took my hand. We started again. Finally, she said she had to stop and that fair was fair. It finally dawned on me that my aunt and cousin would be home soon and I didn't want them not to be able to find me. She walked me to the door and told me not to mention anything to my aunt. Why would I do that? She asked me to change her sign on the way out, gave me another deep kiss and asked if I could help her again on Sunday evening. Who was I to say no to that offer? I got back to my aunt's apartment and immediately hopped in the shower. By the time I got out, my aunt and cousin were home. They both commented that I looked tired. I told them I'd probably stayed in the sun too long. My aunt made an amazing dinner, and since I was so worn out I went to bed early. Sleep was hard to come by since my mind couldn't let go of all that had happened that afternoon. All I knew was I had tomorrow evening to look forward to. I woke up Sunday and tried to remember if I was dreaming or if my time with Tanya had been real. I finally decided it really happened. My aunt made a wonderful brunch and then I spent a lot of the day helping her around her place and with errands. In the afternoon, I headed over to the pool while my mind was churning with how I was going to be able to slip out and get to Tanya's apartment. Surprisingly, the day went by quickly. Soon it was time for dinner and I still had no idea what to do or say. But I was on a real lucky streak, and as we were eating my cousin said that she'd made plans earlier in the week to meet up with some friends at a nightclub. My aunt asked me if I minded if she went to her weekly mahjong game. She told me if I preferred she'd stay home and we could go to a movie. I told her I'd be fine, and soon they were both gone and I was heading to Tanya's apartment. I stood outside her door for a couple of minutes. I couldn't bring myself to knock, I was so nervous. Yesterday had been spontaneous and I'd had no idea what was going to happen, but today, I had an idea of what was in store. I finally knocked and hoped when I said hello my voice didn't crack. Tanya answered the door dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. That didn't matter to me, she still looked amazingly. She invited me in and closed the door. When we broke the kiss she asked me if I would be willing to help her with some boxes that were in storage above a closet in her second bedroom. It looked like it was mostly a storage room even though it had a bed in it. She told me she needed to take them down and swap some things in and out. She said it would be easier for me to move the boxes down and put them back since I was a lot taller than her. She brought in a step ladder and I could see why she needed some help. We spent about a half hour rearranging things in the boxes and then she said that was all she needed to do. She put the step ladder and said, "I need a shower." Tanya gave me a couple of minutes to recuperate and then said what had become our catchphrase, "Fair is fair." I didn't need any more encouragement. I tried to remember and do things the way she'd told me the day before. I don't know if I did. All of a sudden, she sank to the floor. I guess I had done okay. I gave her a few minutes to recover then helped her stand. Tanya led me back to her bedroom. After a while, she looked back at me and said, "Fair is fair." Tanya asked me, "Have you ever done this?" I'd only a couple of teenage girlfriends. I told her no. We laid there for a short time. I asked if we could get something cold to drink and we got up and headed back to the living room. Tanya went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of cold water. She said that would do more to quench our thirst than anything else. We sat on the couch. I couldn't believe I was sitting on a couch with a 40-something mom. Eventually, Tanya asked me when I had to be back at my aunt's place. I figured I had at least another hour but told her I could find a reason I wasn't there if my aunt got home before me. That was all the encouragement Tanya needed. It was late and Tanya said I needed to get back to my aunt's place. She asked me when I was leaving and I told her Monday around noon. I told her I had to be home before my folks returned because I didn't want there to be a gap between when I left the valley and when I got home, in case my mom talked with her sister. Tanya asked if I could stop by for a little bit before I left and I told her I'd figure out a way to do that. We both stood up. We hugged. Then she told me to let myself out. She saw I was hesitating and told me she'd see me tomorrow around noon. I opened the door, walked out and closed it. I heard the locks turn and knew I couldn't go back now. I walked to the parking lot and approached my aunt's place from that angle. I realized my aunt was back from her mahjong game when I unlocked the door. She asked where I'd been and I told her I'd had a craving for some ice cream and had driven to a nearby strip mall that had a Baskin-Robbins. She told she had ice cream in the freezer and I said I wanted a hot fudge sundae. That seemed to satisfy her. We stayed up and chatted for a little longer. Then both went to bed before my cousin got home. I was already planning out how I'd get to Tanya's the next day that I guess Tanya had worn me out the night before because I slept in on Monday. I finally got up and took a shower, and when I was coming out of the bathroom I ran into my cousin, who was also just getting up. She asked me to tell her mom that she'd be ready to eat in a little while. I went to the kitchen, delivered the message, and my aunt said she'd make us brunch. When my cousin got to the table there was another gourmet feast, and we all enjoyed the meal. My cousin told us about the band she saw at the nightclub and I got a little jealous as I thought they were great and was pissed I couldn't have gone to see them. Then the thought of the previous evening kicked in, and I realized that the memories from our exploits would last a lot longer than seeing the band. We talked for a while after eating, and I told my aunt and cousin I was going to head out to drive home. I already had a plan in place to visit Tanya, so I stuffed my things in my duffel, kissed them both goodbye and headed for my car. I threw everything into the trunk and drove out of the apartment lot. Instead of heading home, I turned towards the apartment complex that backed up to my aunt's complex. I turned into the parking area and found a vacant visitor space, parked my car, and climbed over the fence separating the two complexes. I walked to Tanya's apartment, knocked on the door and she opened it. She was dressed in a button-down blouse and a skirt and looked like she was going to an office. She pulled me in, and said, "I have to show a couple a vacant apartment. They called this morning and I have to do my job. Just make yourself comfortable and I should be back in a half hour or so. Don't answer the door if anybody knocks. I have my key and when I'm done, I'll just unlock the door." Tanya left to show the apartment, and I locked the door behind her. I sat down and picked up a magazine that was on an end table. Not my kind of magazine but I figured I could kill the time with it. About 30 minutes later, I heard the key in the lock and the door opened. Tanya walked in, sat down next to me, pulled my head to her. We stopped and she asked how long I had, and I told her maybe 4 hours. She told me to just sit tight when she returned. She was wearing a silky robe that reached. Tanya said, "Now." She looked at me and said, feeling pretty confident, "Weren't you?" I responded, "Yes." And then I told her if this hadn't happened, I'd have just driven home. Suddenly we were both laughing for no reason. I guess it was all the tension being released. We got up and put some pillows against the wall and then leaned back into them and sat there babbling about nothing in particular. There'd been a question on my mind since the first afternoon, and I finally worked up the nerve to ask Tanya. "Why did you invite me back the first day and then spend the weekend teaching me so much? I know I'm okay looking but not really handsome. You had to know I was pretty inexperienced, at least after the first day." Tanya sighed deeply and told me the reasons why. "I've been married and divorced twice to men my own age. In high school, I was a wild child and fell for a classmate. After high school, we got married and found jobs. The first few years were good, but money was always tight. My husband lost his job and rather than looking for another one he started drinking. In less than 6 months, instead of the guy I knew, he became a drunk. He wasn't abusive, but I saw no future so we got divorced. I started taking classes at a junior college and then went to a state school and got a degree. I found a good job and decided to concentrate on that instead of men. But then a customer of ours asked me out. He was so nice, my age, handsome with a steady job. We got married less than 6 months later. But it turned out he was a serial cheater, and less than 2 years after we married, I was divorced again. I decided then that I wasn't going to marry again. And it seemed all the nice guys I knew who were my age were already married and I wasn't going to be the one to make any of them cheat. I just stayed away from men for a long time. I thought I'd date again but not guys my age. Unfortunately, younger, 20, and 30-year-olds, only wanted to and to show me off to their buddies. I felt like an ornament instead of a date. That's when I decided to start finding nice teenage guys. I knew they'd be inexperienced, but I knew I could help with that. I also knew they weren't looking for a relationship and weren't in any position to take me out and show me off. The other day when you were so polite and agreed to help me, a stranger, I knew you were a good choice. After listening quietly, I noticed she had some tears running down her cheeks. I put my arms around her and just held her. She said thanks and gave me a very soft kiss on the lips. Then we went to the kitchen to get some water. We sat back down on the couch, her still in the red negligee. We talked about nothing in particular, and then Tanya said, "Let's quit talking and have some more fun." Previously, there had always been the catchphrase "fair is fair" and we'd switch places. Surprisingly, it didn't take long for me to feel the urge. She just laughed and said, "But we can clean it up." We got up and made our way to the bathroom. I knew it was getting late, and I definitely wanted to be home before my folks got there. Actually, I didn't want to leave at all. Despite what she'd told me, I wanted to move in with her and spend the rest of my life having with Tanya. I think she sensed my feelings and told me she'd had a great weekend with me but I needed to go. We walked to the door. I wasn't sure how to say goodbye to this amazing mom who had taught me so much that weekend. I asked if I could stop by again when I was visiting, and she told me that would be okay, but not for a few weeks. She opened the door. I walked out and headed for the fence, climbed over and got in my car and drove home. It was the end of summer, and my senior year started in a week. I called my aunt and asked if I could come out for a visit and maybe a last swim in the pool. She told me my cousin had already gone back to college but I was always welcome. I drove out to the valley and wound up helping my aunt with some chores and errands. I asked if it was okay to go swimming, and she said it was fine with her. I changed into my swim trunks, grabbed a towel and headed to the pool. After a quick dip and some end-of-summer sun, I walked over to Tanya's apartment and knocked on the door. I was surprised when a man answered. I asked him if I could speak with the manager and he told me he was the manager. I made up a story that there was something odd happening with the pool filter and he said he'd check it out. I asked where Tanya was and he said I probably meant the manager he replaced but didn't know her name. He told me one of the residents had complained Tanya I was crushed on so many levels. There was no internet and I didn't even know her last name. I trudged back to my aunt's place and tried to put a good spin on the day. We had dinner and I drove home. Truly disappointed, until I